For my entire adult life, my older sister, Tamsin, weaponized my success. She built her entire glamorous, debt-ridden existence on the belief that I, Elara Vance, was a quiet failure, a boring government lawyer with no ambition, no style, and certainly no power. She loved to tell everyone, including me, that I was worthless. This toxicity climaxed in a high-stakes courtroom, moments before a hearing that would decide the fate of our family's last remaining asset. As she publicly tore me down, calling me a spineless, ambitionless clerk, in the echoing silence of the federal court, she looked at the empty judge's bench with impatience. That was the moment I realized the exquisite irony. My quiet career wasn't boring, it was powerful. I stood up, walked past my astonished sister, moved to the center of the courtroom, and watched her face shatter as the bailiff snapped to attention and said, "Good morning, Your Honor." I was the judge assigned to her case, and the price of her years of cruelty was about to become very, very high. The marble floors of the U.S. Court of Appeals in Chicago were cold, echoing, and unforgiving. The air itself felt heavy, saturated with the weight of law and finality. I, Elara Vance, stood quietly near the entrance of Courtroom 4B, clad in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, a uniform designed for blending into the halls of power, not demanding attention. I was 37 years old, and for the last 5 years, I had held a position that would make 99% of practicing attorneys weep with envy. Federal Circuit Court judge. But to my family, especially my older sister, Tamsin Tammy Vance, I was merely a senior government attorney with a decent pension. Tamsin, 40, swept into the hallway, leaving a trail of expensive, cloying perfume and frantic energy. She was dressed in a pristine white Chanel-inspired suit and 4-inch stilettos, an outfit that screamed status, not solvency. Tamsin was a walking contradiction. The owner of a failing high-end consignment boutique, perpetually obsessed with appearances, and chronically in debt. She was the family's star, the loud, flamboyant one who always took center stage. And I was her perpetually disappointing shadow. The conflict that brought us here was the dividing of the Vance family estate. 10 acres of untouched, pristine lakefront land in upstate New York, which my father had left equally to us before his sudden passing 3 years prior. It was the only place I ever felt peace, and I wanted to hold it or develop it sustainably. Tamsin, however, saw it as a massive, immediate line of credit. She was bleeding money from her boutique, her mortgage was overdue, and she was desperate to liquidate her assets. She had accepted a lowball, aggressive offer of $1.5 million from a developer, hoping to strong-arm me into signing off on the sale to get her half quickly. When I refused, she forced the issue into the court system, demanding a partition and immediate sale. "There you are, Ellie," Tamsin hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut the marble. She didn't embrace me. She gave my suit a dismissive glance. "Honestly, must you dress like a paralegal? You couldn't spring for a decent designer for a major court appearance? You look entirely too cheap for this courtroom." Her lawyer, a slick, self-important man named Marcus Thorne, approached. He didn't even acknowledge me, focused entirely on Tamsin. "Mrs. Vance, we have this. Judge Caldwell is very reasonable, and we have a precedent for forced liquidation in these cases. Your sister is merely delaying the inevitable, trying to force you into buying her out." Tamsin leaned in, her voice dropping, though still loud enough to carry in the cavernous hall. "She can't buy me out, Marcus. She saves every penny she makes from her boring desk job. She lives like a pauper. She's a creature of habit, entirely devoid of ambition. She's the definition of a worthless government clerk." I offered a tight, polite smile. "Good morning, Tamsin. Marcus, I trust you are prepared to address the fiduciary responsibilities of selling a family asset for 50% under market value." "Oh please, Ellie," Tamsin sneered, rolling her eyes. "Stop talking like you understand finance. You just shuffle papers for the man. I, on the other hand, am a business owner. I deal with real money, real margins, and real pressure. You wouldn't know pressure if it sat on your desk and handed you a brief." This had been the narrative for 20 years. Tamsin, the ambitious, brilliant star, me, the meek, quiet, boring one. They had no idea that my boring desk job involved ruling on complex regulatory cases that determined the fate of multi-billion-dollar corporations. My secret was intentional. After a decade of Tamsin's exploitation, I cut off all meaningful information, letting her believe the lie of my mediocrity. It was the only way to retain my peace and my privacy. At 9 a.m. sharp, the bailiff opened the heavy oak doors to Courtroom 4B. All rise. Court is now in session. Inside, the room was magnificent, designed to inspire awe. Dark mahogany paneling, towering ceilings, and a massive, empty bench that symbolized the immense power of the judiciary. Tamsin marched in confidently, her stilettos clicking sharply on the polished wood, taking a seat at the plaintiff's table. I took the respondent's seat, placing my thin leather briefcase neatly before me. The bailiff, a stern, imposing woman named Ms. Ramirez, stood by the entrance, her expression impassive. "Where is the judge?" Tamsin whispered loudly to Marcus. "Tell him to hurry up. I have an appointment at my boutique. I can't waste my day waiting for some old man." Marcus stood up and approached Ms. Ramirez. "Excuse me, Ms. Ramirez, but Judge Caldwell is scheduled to preside. Is he delayed?" "I'm afraid Judge Caldwell was called to an emergency meeting in Washington and will be unable to preside this morning," Ms. Ramirez replied flatly. "The court has appointed a substitute to hear the motion for immediate partition." Tamsin's face soured. She spun around and glared at me, her eyes full of venom. "Oh, perfect. Now we get some temp judge who just rushed in from traffic court. Look at you, Ellie. You have zero respect for status. You always take the easy, quiet way out. You spend your life hiding behind bureaucracy, thinking you're smarter than everyone else. But you're not. You're a useless, ambitionless clerk who just can't face the fact that you're worthless and don't belong in rooms like this." The words, sharp and final, echoed slightly in the grand, silent room. Marcus Thorne actually winced, glancing nervously at the bailiff. I felt a profound stillness settle over me. The years of quiet resentment, the dismissals, the insults, they all coalesced into a single, cold, powerful determination. She had pushed me past the point of no return. I looked at Tamsin, letting the moment stretch out. She was breathing heavily, convinced she had won the moral ground. Then I slowly stood up. I didn't rush. I smoothly picked up my briefcase, gave Ms. Ramirez a single, knowing look, and began walking. I walked directly past the witness stand, past the jury box, and right toward the massive, elevated mahogany bench. Tamsin watched me with a look of confused fury, opening her mouth to hiss another insult. But before she could speak, Ms. Ramirez, the stern, imposing bailiff, snapped her heels together, her spine stiffening into a perfect military salute, and spoke in a clear, resonant voice that filled the courtroom. "All rise. Please be advised that Judge Elara Vance will be presiding over this matter." Tamsin froze mid-insult. Marcus Thorne's jaw dropped, sending his expensive pen clattering onto the floor. The sound was deafening. I reached the bench, placed my briefcase down, and looked directly into Tamsin's face. The color had drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking pale and terrified, realizing the full, agonizing extent of her error. Her eyes darted from me, to the bailiff, to the empty seat she assumed the judge would occupy. I gave Tamsin a tiny, cold smile. Then I turned my back to her. I reached under the bench, retrieved the heavy, black judicial robe, and smoothly slipped it on. The weight of the silk and velvet was a familiar, comforting pressure. I stepped up to the massive, leather chair, looked over the courtroom, and then directly at Ms. Ramirez. "Good morning, Your Honor," Ms. Ramirez said, her voice now filled with professional deference. I nodded once, then sat down. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the frantic sound of Marcus Thorne scrambling to pick up his pen. I picked up the gavel, the symbol of my authority, and tapped it once, a clean, sharp sound. "This court is now in session," I stated, my voice deeper, richer, and amplified by the courtroom's acoustics. I looked down at the petitioner's table. Tamsin was staring at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. Marcus was rapidly flipping through his papers, looking for any way out. Case 23-441. A. Vance versus Vance, regarding the partition and sale of family assets. I continued, addressing the room, but my eyes were locked on Tamsin. "Mr. Thorne, you may proceed with the petitioner's motion for immediate sale." Marcus, stammering, somehow managed to stand. Your Honor. Judge Vance, my sincere apologies. I was unaware of the conflict of interest. There is no conflict of interest, counsel. I cut him off sharply. My relationship to the petitioner is simply a family one, which, as a matter of law, does not prohibit my unbiased review of this financial motion. I will recuse myself only if the proceedings become unduly emotional. I let the word hang, a clear warning to Tamsin. Tamsin tried to whisper something to Marcus, but he silenced her with a fierce shake of the head. I continued, my voice unwavering, reading from the brief I had already studied in detail. Mr. Thorne, the petitioner seeks to sell the property at a valuation of $1.5 million against the respondents. My insistence that the true, appraised market value is closer to $3 million, especially for sustainable, non-commercial development. This court finds that the petitioner's insistence on an immediate, low-valuation sale, coupled with the admitted financial duress of the petitioner's associated business, raises serious questions regarding the petitioner's fiduciary responsibility to the estate. I tapped the gavel on the wood block again, the sound commanding. Therefore, the court denies the petitioner's motion for immediate sale. Tamsin gasped a loud, ragged sound. Marcus looked sick. Furthermore, I continued, leaning slightly into the microphone, my words now a chillingly precise instrument of revenge. Due to the petitioner's documented instability and the insistence on sacrificing family assets for personal, immediate gain, the court finds it necessary to ensure the protection of the remaining assets. I hereby order a mandatory, independent forensic accounting of the petitioner's business, Tamsin Vance Boutique LLC, to determine the actual financial distress and the source of the funds used to pay for legal representation. The court will appoint a mediator to oversee a new appraisal process and manage the estate until a fair market solution is found. I let Tamsin absorb the words. A forensic accounting. That meant every questionable loan, every overextended credit line, and every shady business practice she had ever engaged in would be laid bare. It wouldn't just delay her payout. It would expose her as a financial fraud, potentially leading to bankruptcy and the total destruction of the fragile status she had built her life upon. I looked at Tamsin, who now looked smaller than I had ever seen her, humbled, exposed, and utterly ruined by the very ambition she had always claimed to possess. The case is referred to the court-appointed mediator. I finished, my voice flat. I picked up the gavel. Court is adjourned. I struck the gavel down 3 times. The sharp cracks echoed across the silence. As Ms. Ramirez loudly declared, "All rise." I stood, shedding the heavy black robe and placing the gavel neatly back on the bench. I did not look at Tamsin again. I simply gathered my charcoal gray briefcase, the accessory of a worthless government clerk, and walked out through the private side door, leaving Tamsin and her high-priced lawyer alone in the magnificent, empty room to contemplate the terrifying, delayed justice of a truly ambitious sister.